On a frigid Tuesday night in Manhattan, inside the hushed, gilded cage of Aura, a restaurant where a single appetizer cost more than a week's groceries, Clara Evans knew she was about to be fired. Her crime wasn't a dropped plate or a forgotten order. Her crime was that she saw too much. She noticed the tremble in the hand of the socialite in booth 7, the forced smile of the CEO at table 3, and the silent, suffocating terror in the eyes of a little girl who was about to be devoured not by the gourmet food on her plate, but by the very people who were supposed to protect her. What Clara didn't know was that her decision to intervene, to risk her rent money and her future for a child she'd never met, was being watched. Across the room, the girl's father, Julian Croft, a man whose net worth could absorb the GDP of a small nation, sat trapped in a prison of his own making, a gilded cage far more confining than the restaurant. Clara's quiet act of rebellion that night wouldn't just save a little girl from a public humiliation. It would ignite a chain reaction that would shatter Julian's carefully constructed world and rebuild hers from the ashes, forever. The air in Aura was thick with the scent of truffle oil and quiet desperation. It was a place people came not to eat, but to be seen eating, a theater where the price of admission was a reservation made 3 months in advance. Clara moved between the tables like a ghost, her black uniform a stark contrast to the jewel-toned silks and bespoke suits of the patrons. At 22, she had mastered the art of invisibility. She could refill a water glass without interrupting a sentence, clear a plate without breaking a gaze. She had to. Jean-Pierre, the manager, a man who seemed to have been born in a starched collar, patrolled the floor like a hawk, his eyes missing nothing. A single smudge on a wine glass, a fork placed a millimeter out of alignment, was grounds for a lecture that could strip paint. Clara needed this job. She needed it with a primal, aching urgency that lived in the pit of her stomach. The tips she made here didn't just pay for her shoebox apartment in Queens. They paid for the specialized physical therapy her younger brother Leo needed 3 times a week. Leo, with his bright, mischievous eyes and a body that had betrayed him since birth, was the sun around which Clara's world revolved. Every forced smile she gave to a condescending diner, every hour she spent on her aching feet, was for him. A text from her mother vibrated in her pocket. Leo's new brace isn't covered. Insurance is fighting it again. Clara's breath caught. That was another $800 they didn't have. She forced the panic down, plastering on the serene professional mask she wore to work. Invisibility was survival. Then they walked in. He was first, tall, with dark hair silvering at the temples, and a face that could have been carved from granite. He wore a dark gray suit that whispered its expense rather than shouting it. There was an aura of power around him, a stillness that made the obsequious Jean-Pierre bow just a little deeper. Behind him was a woman, Isabella, poured into a crimson dress, her diamonds catching the light and scattering it like fractured stars. Her smile was a weapon, sharp and perfectly aimed, and trailing them, a small, somber shadow, was the girl. She couldn't have been more than 7. Her name, Clara would later learn, was Eliana, but everyone called her Eli. She wore a simple navy blue dress, her dark hair pulled back in a tight braid. But it was her eyes that snared Clara's attention, enormous, dark pools of liquid anxiety. They darted around the room, taking in the low murmur of conversation, the clinking of silver, the oppressive opulence, as if each new sensation were a physical blow. A pair of bulky, pink noise-canceling headphones were clamped over her ears, a desperate shield against the world. Clara watched from her station as Jean-Pierre led them to the best table in the house, a secluded corner booth with a panoramic view of the glittering city lights. She saw the way the man, Julian, barely looked at his daughter, his gaze distant, his shoulders slumped with a weight no tailor could disguise. She saw the way the woman, Isabella, steered the child by the elbow, her touch impatient, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. And she saw the way Eli flinched from that touch, her small body rigid with tension. A familiar pang of recognition, sharp and painful, shot through Clara. She had seen that look before. In the mirror on Leo's face, on the rare occasions her mother had dragged him to a crowded store or a family gathering. It was the look of sensory overload, the silent scream of a nervous system under siege. Clara, table 5 needs their check. Stop daydreaming, Jean-Pierre hissed as he swept past. Clara snapped back to the present, her heart hammering. She grabbed the leather billfold and moved toward table 5, her professional mask firmly in place. But she couldn't stop watching the corner booth. Her section was on the other side of the restaurant, but it might as well have been on the moon. She felt an invisible thread connecting her to that little girl. She saw Isabella lean in and say something to Eli, her red lips moving animatedly. Then with a flick of her wrist, Isabella reached over and pulled the pink headphones from the child's head. The effect was instantaneous and brutal. Eli's entire body recoiled as if she'd been struck. The ambient noise of the restaurant, the clatter, the chatter, the music, crashed over her in a tidal wave. Her hands flew up to cover her ears, her small shoulders hunching up to her neck. A low, guttural humming sound started in her chest, a desperate attempt to create a wall of sound to block out the assault. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted around the room, unfocused, seeing nothing and everything at once. Julian finally looked up from his phone, a flicker of irritation crossing his features before it was replaced by a familiar, weary resignation. Isabella, perhaps we should— Don't be ridiculous, Julian, Isabella snapped, her voice a perfectly modulated whisper that still managed to carry the sting of a whip. She has to learn. We can't coddle her forever. She's 7 years old, not an infant. She will sit here and behave like a civilized human being. She placed the headphones on the seat beside her, a deliberate final gesture. Clara felt a hot spike of anger pierce through her practiced composure. She has to learn? Learn what? How to pretend she isn't in agony so you can have your perfect little dinner party? The appetizers arrived, a kaleidoscope of colors and textures artfully arranged on stark white plates. A waiter placed a small dish in front of Eli, a deconstructed scallop mousse with a saffron foam and microgreens. To Eli, it must have looked like an alien landscape, threatening and incomprehensible. Isabella picked up a small silver fork. Come on, Eli, it's delicious. Just one bite for me. She held the fork up to the child's lips. Eli recoiled violently, turning her head away, her humming growing louder. She began to rock back and forth in the booth, a metronome of misery. Eliana, Isabella's voice was now tight with frustration, the mask of the perfect hostess beginning to crack. Do not make a scene. You will eat this. She tried to force the fork toward the girl's mouth again. That's when the first sob broke free, a raw, tearing sound that seemed ripped from the child's soul. It was quickly followed by another. The humming turned into a high-pitched keen. Eli's small hands started flapping at her sides, her body overwhelmed, her mind lost in a storm of unbearable sensation. Heads began to turn. The low murmur of the restaurant faltered. Patrons exchanged glances, some annoyed, some merely curious. A woman at a nearby table sighed dramatically and muttered something to her companion about people who can't control their children. Julian's face was a mask of impotent shame. He reached for Eli, his hand hovering over her shoulder before falling back to his lap, as if he didn't know how to touch his own daughter. Eli, honey, please, calm down. Everyone is looking. His words were gasoline on a fire. The plea to be quiet, to be normal for the sake of strangers, only amplified her distress. Her keening grew louder, more frantic. Isabella's face flushed a deep, ugly red. This is mortifying, she hissed at Julian. Do something. Before Julian could react, Jean-Pierre was there, gliding to their table with the grim finality of an executioner. Is there a problem here, Mr. Croft? His voice was smooth as silk, but his eyes were chips of ice. Our daughter is just a little overwhelmed, Julian stammered, looking anywhere but at the manager. Indeed, Jean-Pierre said, his gaze lingering on the sobbing, rocking child with undisguised contempt. Perhaps it would be best if you concluded your evening. We have a certain ambiance to maintain at Aura. The public humiliation was complete. They were being thrown out. Isabella looked as if she'd been slapped. Julian just looked broken. Clara stood frozen by her station, her tray of empty glasses forgotten. Her blood was pounding in her ears. She saw her job, her rent, Leo's physical therapy, all of it hanging by a thread. To intervene now would be professional suicide. Jean-Pierre would fire her on the spot, no questions asked. She should turn away, go back to the kitchen, remain invisible. It was the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But then she looked at Eli. She saw the raw terror on that small face, the desperate, unheard plea for help. And in that moment, Eli wasn't a stranger's child in a restaurant Clara couldn't afford. She was Leo. She was every child who had ever been misunderstood, dismissed, and punished for simply being different. The decision wasn't a decision at all. It was an imperative. Her body moved before her brain could stop it. She set the tray down with a soft click and started walking toward the corner booth. Every step was deliberate, a drumbeat against the sudden, ringing silence of the dining room. She could feel Jean-Pierre's glare burning into her back. She could feel the weight of every patron's stare. She ignored them all. Her focus was entirely on the small, trembling girl in the booth. She didn't approach head-on. She remembered what the therapist had taught her family about Leo. Never approach from the front. It's confrontational. Come in from the side, slowly. Let them see you without feeling trapped. She came around the side of the table, placing herself slightly in Julian's line of sight, but angling her body toward Eli. She crouched down, bringing herself to the child's eye level. A position of help, not authority. "Hey there," she said, her voice barely a whisper, low and calm. She didn't try to touch Eli. She didn't even make direct eye contact, instead focusing on a point just past the girl's shoulder. "That's a lot of noise in here, isn't it? It's too much for me sometimes, too." Isabella scoffed. "Who in the world are you? Get away from her. Security." Clara didn't flinch. She kept her attention on Eli. The girl's rocking faltered slightly. Her keening softened, just a fraction. She was listening. "My name is Clara," she continued in that same steady murmur. "My little brother doesn't like loud noises either, or bright lights, or lumpy food. It makes his brain feel buzzy. Does your brain feel buzzy right now?" Slowly, hesitantly, Eli's frantic eyes flickered toward Clara. A tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Clara's heart swelled. A connection. That's all it took. "I can help make the buzzing stop if you want," Clara said softly. With a slow, deliberate movement, she reached for the untouched bread roll on Eli's side plate. She broke off a small, plain piece, holding it in her open palm. No fork, no sauce, no surprises, just simple, predictable carbs. "This helps my brother sometimes. It's quiet food." "What is the meaning of this?" Jean-Pierre's voice was thunderous behind her. "Evans, you are finished. Get away from that table now." "Just give me 1 minute," Clara said over her shoulder, her voice pleading but firm. She turned back to Eli, extending her hand with the bread. "It's okay if you don't want it. No pressure." She waited. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, Eli just stared at the piece of bread. Her rocking had almost stopped. Her breathing was still ragged, but the frantic edge was gone. Then with a tentative, trembling hand, she reached out and took the bread from Clara's palm. Her small fingers brushed against Clara's, and a jolt, like a tiny spark of electricity, passed between them. Eli brought the bread to her lips and took a small bite. She chewed slowly, methodically. The keening sound stopped completely. She took another bite. The silence that descended on the table was more profound than the noise that had preceded it. Isabella stared, her mouth agape. Jean-Pierre was frozen in disbelief. And Julian was looking at Clara with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. It was a mixture of raw shock, profound confusion, and something else. Something that looked like a drowning man seeing a life raft. "How?" Julian's voice was a ragged whisper. "How did you do that?" Before Clara could answer, Isabella found her voice. "This is absurd. I will not be undermined by a waitress." "Julian, are you going to allow this?" But Julian wasn't looking at Isabella. He was looking at his daughter, who had just finished the piece of bread and was now looking expectantly at Clara, a silent question in her eyes. With a small conspiratorial smile, Clara broke off another piece. "Evans, my office, now!" Jean-Pierre finally roared, his face purple with rage. "That won't be necessary," a new voice cut in, cold and laced with steel. It was Julian. He was on his feet, his earlier hesitation gone, replaced by a chilling, absolute authority. He looked at Jean-Pierre, and for the first time, Clara understood what real power looked like. It wasn't loud, it was deadly quiet. "This young woman," Julian said, his voice dangerously low as he gestured toward Clara, "has shown my daughter more compassion and understanding in the last 2 minutes than anyone has in years. You, on the other hand, have attempted to publicly humiliate my family and have threatened your employee for an act of basic human decency." Jean-Pierre paled. "Mr. Croft, I assure you, I was only trying to maintain the restaurant's standards." "Your standards are irrelevant to me now," Julian cut him off. He pulled out a black credit card. "Give me the check for our meal and add a $50,000 tip for Miss Evans. I assume that will cover her final paycheck." Clara's jaw dropped. $50,000. Jean-Pierre sputtered, "Sir, that's not necessary. She is, of course, not fired. A simple misunderstanding." "She is not fired because she is quitting," Julian stated, his gaze unyielding. "And as for you, I'd update your resume. I'm buying this restaurant, not because I have any interest in the food, but for the distinct pleasure of firing you personally. I will be speaking to your owners in the morning." A collective gasp went through the nearby tables. Isabella looked at Julian as if seeing him for the first time, a flicker of fear mixed with a new, avaricious excitement in her eyes. Jean-Pierre looked like he was going to be physically ill. Julian ignored them all. He crouched down beside Clara, his expensive suit creasing on the plush carpet. He looked from her to his daughter, who was now calmly watching them, her thumb in her mouth. "My car is waiting outside," he said to Clara, his voice softer now, stripped of its anger, leaving only a raw, desperate vulnerability. "Please, will you help me get her home? I don't know what I'm doing." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Clara looked at the checkbook-wielding billionaire, the scheming girlfriend, the terrified child, and the ruins of her career scattered across the floor of a Michelin star restaurant. The smart answer, the sane answer, was to take the absurdly large tip and run as fast as she could. But then she looked at Eli. The little girl's dark eyes were fixed on her, no longer frantic, but filled with a quiet, heartbreaking hope. It was the same look Leo gave her when he was scared, a look that said, "You're the only one who gets it. Don't leave me." Clara took a breath, the scent of truffles and burnt bridges filling her lungs. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Okay, Mr. Croft. I'll help you." The ride to the penthouse was a study in surreal silence. The inside of the Rolls-Royce was bigger than Clara's bedroom, smelling of rich leather and old money. A silent driver navigated the city's glittering streets, while a glass partition provided complete privacy. Isabella sat in the front, rigid and fuming, pointedly ignoring everyone in the back. In the spacious rear cabin, Julian sat on one side, staring out the window at the blurred lights of the city, looking utterly lost. Clara sat on the other, with Eli nestled beside her. The little girl hadn't let go of her hand since they left the restaurant. She had leaned her head against Clara's arm, her small body finally relaxed, and within minutes she was asleep, the faint, rhythmic puff of her breath a peaceful counterpoint to the tension in the car. Clara studied Julian's reflection in the window. The lines of exhaustion around his eyes were deeper than she'd noticed in the restaurant's dim lighting. He wasn't just a powerful billionaire. He was a man hollowed out by grief. She could see it now, the same haunted look her own father had worn in the years after Leo's diagnosis. The penthouse was on the 88th floor of a glass tower that pierced the sky over Central Park. The private elevator opened directly into a living space so vast and minimalist, it felt more like an art gallery than a home. White walls, soaring ceilings, and floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking, godlike view of Manhattan. But it was cold, impersonal. There were no family photos on the gleaming surfaces, no childish drawings taped to the refrigerator. No sense that a life was actually lived here. It was a beautiful, sterile tomb. Julian gently lifted the sleeping Eli from the car seat they'd transferred her to and carried her down a long, white hallway. Clara followed, feeling completely out of place, her worn sneakers silent on the polished marble floors. Eli's room was the only place that showed any sign of a child's presence. There was a large, soft bed, shelves filled with books, and a collection of smooth gray stones arranged in careful lines on a windowsill. Even so, it felt more like a showroom than a sanctuary. Julian laid his daughter on the bed, his movements clumsy but tender. He pulled a soft blanket over her, his hand hovering for a moment over her dark hair, before he pulled away, as if afraid to make contact. He stood there for a long moment, just watching her breathe. When he finally turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind him, Isabella was waiting in the hallway. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with venom, "that was a spectacular disaster. Firing a waitress and buying a restaurant. A bit dramatic, even for you, Julian." "It's late, Isabella," Julian said, his voice flat with exhaustion. "We'll talk about this tomorrow." "Oh, we'll talk about it now," she shot back, stepping in front of him, blocking his path. "What was that? Letting some minimum wage worker humiliate me, undermine my authority with your daughter? And now you've brought her here? To our home?" "She helped Eli," Julian said simply. "She made a lucky guess," Isabella scoffed. "And in the process, she made us the laughingstock of the entire restaurant. Do you have any idea who was there tonight? The Vanderbilts, the editor of Vogue? My phone has been buzzing nonstop. This is a PR nightmare." Clara, who had been lingering awkwardly near the doorway, began to back away, wanting no part of this. But Julian saw her. "Please wait," he called out, his voice weary. He turned back to Isabella. "This is not about public relations. This is about my daughter, something you seem to have forgotten." "I have done nothing but try with that child," Isabella's voice rose, cracking the serene silence of the penthouse. "I plan parties she won't attend. I buy her clothes she won't wear. I try to take her to places a normal little girl would love. It's not my fault she's like this. You can't expect me to put my entire life on hold to cater to her every whim." The cruelty of her words hung in the air, sharp and glittering as her diamonds. Julian flinched as if he'd been struck. For the first time, a flicker of hard anger ignited in his tired eyes. "She is not like this, Isabella. She is my daughter," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And if you see her as an inconvenience, a PR nightmare, then you have no place in her life, or in mine." He stepped around her. "My driver can take you home." Isabella's jaw dropped. The shock on her face was theatrical. You're kicking me out? For a waitress?" "I'm asking you to leave because you showed your true colors tonight," Julian said, not even looking at her as he walked toward the living area where Clara waited. "And they are profoundly ugly." He didn't wait for her reply. The sound of a slammed door and Isabella's indignant heels clicking furiously on the marble floor echoed down the hall a moment later. Silence descended. Julian walked over to the massive window and stared out at the city lights, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Clara stood by the hallway, unsure if she should leave, her heart pounding. The $50,000 tip felt like a lifetime ago. "I apologize for that," he said finally, his voice rough. He turned from the window to face her. "You should never have been subjected to it." "It's okay," Clara murmured, though it wasn't. He ran a hand through his hair, the first gesture of dishevelment she'd seen from him. "My wife, Eleanor, she understood Eli. She just knew. She knew what the humming meant, knew which fabrics would feel like sandpaper on her skin, knew how to calm the storms before they even started. They had their own language, one I was never fluent in." He paused, swallowing hard. "When Eleanor died 2 years ago, the language died with her. I've been trying to read a book written in characters I can't decipher. I've hired the best specialists, therapists, nannies. They come in with their textbooks and their theories, but none of them have ever connected with her." He looked at Clara, his gaze intense, searching. "But you did. In that restaurant for the first time since Eleanor died, I saw someone reach my daughter. It wasn't in a textbook. What was it?" Clara thought of Leo, of the years of trial and error, of late nights reading obscure blogs written by parents, of learning to see the world through his eyes. "It wasn't a trick," she said quietly. "I just listened. Not with my ears, but with my eyes." Her body was screaming that she was overwhelmed. The headphones coming off was the trigger. The fancy food was an attack. Everyone telling her to be quiet was just more noise. All she needed was for someone to make the world small and quiet for a minute. The bread, it was just something simple, predictable, safe. He stared at her, a look of dawning, painful understanding on his face. So simple, he whispered, more to himself than to her. And I never saw it. I've been so busy trying to fix her, to make her fit into my world, that I never stopped to think about what she needs in hers. He walked over to a sleek, minimalist desk and pulled out a checkbook. He started to write, then stopped, setting the pen down with a sigh of frustration. The money I offered you, it was an impulse, he said, a crude, inadequate way of saying thank you. It felt like the only tool I had left. He looked up at her, his expression raw. I want to offer you something else. A job. Clara's stomach tightened. Mr. Croft, I appreciate the thought, but I can't. Hear me out, he interrupted, his voice gaining a desperate urgency. This wouldn't be a nanny position. I don't need another person to watch her. I need a translator, a guide, someone who can teach me the language my wife knew. I want to hire you as a specialized consultant for Eliana. You would work alongside her therapists, help me and my household staff understand her needs, create an environment for her where she can feel safe, not constantly under assault. He named a salary that made Clara's head spin. It was more than triple what her mother, a registered nurse, made in a year. It was enough to pay for Leo's therapy for the next decade. It was escape velocity, but a cold knot of pride and fear formed in her chest. She had seen his world, the cold penthouse, the vicious girlfriend, the crushing weight of his wealth. She would be an employee, a curiosity, the miracle-working waitress. I'm not a charity case, Mr. Croft, she said, her voice firmer than she felt. And I'm not a therapist. I just have a little brother with his own challenges. What I did tonight was instinct, not a professional skill. That instinct is more valuable to me than a dozen PhDs, he insisted, taking a step toward her. Please don't see this as charity. See it for what it is. A desperate father who is failing his child and is willing to pay anything to learn how to be better. Your experience isn't academic, it's real. It's lived. That's precisely why I need you. He could see the hesitation in her eyes. Try it, he pressed. Give me 1 month, 30 days. I'll pay you for the full month up front. If at the end of it, you feel this isn't right for you or for Eli, you can walk away. No questions asked. But please, just give my daughter a chance. Give me a chance to learn how to be her father again. The desperation in his voice was real. This wasn't a billionaire throwing money at a problem. This was a broken man begging for help. Clara looked down the long, silent hallway toward the room where Eli was sleeping. She thought of the little girl's hand in hers, the quiet trust in her eyes. She thought of her mother's text message, the looming dread of another medical bill. This job could solve all her family's financial problems. But more than that, maybe, just maybe, she could actually make a difference for a little girl who was just as lost as her father. She could give Eli a voice. She took a deep breath, her decision solidifying. 1 month, she said, meeting his gaze, on a trial basis. And I'm not a consultant. I'll be her advocate. My job is to advocate for her needs. To you, to the staff, to the therapists. A wave of relief so profound it seemed to physically alter him washed over Julian's face. The tension in his shoulders eased for the first time all night. Advocate, he repeated, nodding slowly. Yes, that's exactly what she needs. He extended his hand, not as a boss to an employee, but as one person to another, sealing a pact. Thank you, Clara. Clara took his hand. It was firm and warm. Don't thank me yet, Mr. Croft, she said, a flicker of her old resolve returning. You might not like everything her advocate has to say. For the first time that night, a genuine ghost of a smile touched Julian Croft's lips. Somehow, he said, I think I'm going to like it just fine. The first week was like learning to breathe underwater. Clara was installed in a guest suite larger than her entire apartment, with a view that made her dizzy. A car was sent for her every morning. A quiet, efficient housekeeper named Maria showed her the labyrinthine ways of the penthouse, but the luxury was isolating. the silence deafening. Clara felt like an exhibit in a museum, the strange creature Julian Croft had brought home from the wild. Her first official act as Eli's advocate was to conduct a full sensory audit of the penthouse. With Julian trailing her, looking both skeptical and intrigued, she walked through every room. "This lighting," she said, pointing to the recessed spotlights in the living room ceiling. "It's like being interrogated. We need lamps, softer, warmer light." In the kitchen, she ran her hand over the cold, stainless steel countertops. "Too much glare, too many reflective surfaces." She opened the pantry. "We need a snack drawer, at her height, filled with things in predictable packaging, things she can open herself. It's about control and choice." She went into Eli's room and took down the heavy, blackout curtains. "She needs to see the sun. She needs to know what time of day it is. It helps regulate her system." She typed up a list of recommendations. Weighted blankets, a small sensory tent for a safe space, fidget toys, a visual schedule board with pictures to show what would happen each day. To his credit, Julian didn't argue. He listened intently, asking questions, his brow furrowed in concentration. He forwarded her list to his assistant, and by the next day the penthouse began to transform. Lamps appeared. A soft, plush rug covered the cold marble floor in the living room. A small white tent, looking like a miniature spaceship, was erected in a corner of Eli's room. But the biggest challenge wasn't the environment, it was Eli herself. In the daylight, without the pressure of a public space, she was a ghost in her own home. She moved silently from room to room, never speaking, her eyes always downcast. She would spend hours arranging her smooth gray stones in intricate patterns. She communicated with a single, sharp nod for yes, and by simply turning away for no. Clara didn't push. She just existed in Eli's space. She would sit on the floor nearby while Eli played with her stones, not speaking, just being a calm, steady presence. She would read a book aloud in the living room, not asking Eli to listen, but filling the oppressive silence with the gentle cadence of a story. The first breakthrough came 5 days in. Clara was sitting on the floor, sketching in a notepad, a habit from her long shifts at the diner. She was drawing a picture of a funny-looking cat. Without a word, Eli got up, walked over, and sat down beside her, her small shoulder almost touching Clara's. She watched Clara's pencil move across the paper. After a few minutes, she gently took the notepad and pencil from Clara's hand. With intense concentration, she drew a single perfect, smooth gray stone next to the cat. She looked up at Clara, a question in her eyes. Clara's heart did a somersault. "It's beautiful, Eli," she whispered, pointing to the drawing. "The cat has a friend now." Eli gave the smallest of smiles and handed the notepad back. It was a conversation without a single word. Julian saw it all from the doorway, his expression unreadable. Later that evening, after Eli was asleep, he found Clara in the kitchen, making herself a cup of tea. Her last therapist said she had no creative impulse, Julian said quietly, leaning against the counter. Another expert, another wrong assessment. There was a new bitterness in his voice, directed not at Eli, but at the world that had failed her. "She's creative," Clara said, stirring her tea. "She just has her own vocabulary. We have to learn to read it." Slowly a routine formed. Mornings were for quiet activities. Afternoons were for adventures. Clara discovered Eli loved the feeling of wind. Their first trip wasn't to a playground, but to the Hudson River Pier, where they just stood and let the breeze blow through their hair. She learned Eli was fascinated by textures. They spent an entire afternoon in a fabric store, just touching bolts of velvet, silk, and rough burlap. Julian began to join them. At first he was awkward, a hulking, silent presence trailing a few feet behind. But Clara would gently draw him in. "Mr. Croft, could you hold this?" Eli wants to feel the fuzzy wool. He began to unbend, to observe his daughter not as a problem to be solved, but as a person to be known. He saw the way her eyes lit up when she saw a dog, the way she traced the patterns in the pavement with her shoe. He started to see her vocabulary. The 1-month trial period came and went. Nobody mentioned it. Clara was no longer a temporary consultant. She was a fixture, a vital part of their tiny, fragile ecosystem. But their quiet bubble was destined to burst. The catalyst was the annual Blackwood Foundation Charity Gala, the glittering centerpiece of the New York philanthropic calendar. Julian, as the foundation's chairman, was required to attend and give the keynote address. Traditionally, it was a family affair. "She can't go," Clara said flatly when Julian brought it up. They were in his home office, a vast room lined with books he'd probably never read. "I know," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know it would be a sensory nightmare for her. But the board, they're already whispering. He hides his daughter. There's something wrong with the girl. It reflects poorly on the foundation's image, which is dedicated to helping children. So you're willing to sacrifice her well-being for the foundation's image?" Clara's voice was sharp. This was the advocacy part of her job, and she wouldn't back down. "No, of course not," he said, stung by her accusation. "But I don't know what to do. If I go alone, the questions get worse. If I don't go at all, I'm abandoning my duty." Clara looked at him, at the genuine conflict on his face. He was trapped. "Then we prepare," she said, a new determination in her voice. "We don't throw her into the storm. We build her a boat." For the next 2 weeks, Operation Gala became their sole focus. Clara got blueprints of the ballroom. She and Eli looked at pictures of the venue, the crowds, the stage. They made a visual schedule for the entire evening, from getting dressed to a planned escape route if things became too much. They practiced. Clara would put on classical music, gradually increasing the volume. They held fancy dinners in the dining room, just the three of them, with Julian and Clara describing what a big party would be like. Clara took Eli to pick out a dress, not a scratchy, frilly confection, but a simple, elegant gown made of the softest, heaviest velvet they could find. The weight was calming, like a hug. And Clara's masterstroke, she worked with a designer to sew small, hidden pockets into the dress, where Eli could keep one of her smooth gray stones to hold on to. She also bought Eli a new pair of headphones, not childish pink ones, but a sleek, silver pair that looked more like a high-fashion accessory than a medical necessity. "She can wear them whenever she feels overwhelmed," Clara explained to Julian. "It's her control, her escape hatch. No one takes them from her, ever." The night of the gala, a fragile, nervous energy filled the penthouse. Eli looked like a tiny, solemn princess in her deep blue velvet dress. She clutched her stone in her pocket, her silver headphones around her neck like a futuristic necklace. Julian, magnificent in a tailored tuxedo, looked more nervous than his daughter. He knelt in front of her. "You are the most beautiful girl in the room, Eli," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And if you want to leave at any time, you just squeeze my hand 3 times, okay? That's our signal. And we're gone. I promise." Eli looked at him, then at Clara, who gave her a reassuring nod. The little girl reached out and squeezed his hand once, then twice, then a 3rd time. It was a practice run. Julian's eyes welled with tears. "Okay," he whispered. Signal received. The ballroom was a glittering cavern of sound and light. 1,000 people in their finest attire, champagne flowing, a string quartet playing. It was even more overwhelming than Clara had anticipated. As they entered, Eli's hand tightened in hers and her other hand immediately went to the stone in her pocket. But people were surprisingly kind. Julian, with Clara at his side, was a different man. He was no longer the absent father. He was the proud, protective Papa Bear. When people approached, he would introduce his daughter quietly, explaining, "Eli is a little overwhelmed by the noise, but she's so happy to be here." He normalized her needs, removing the stigma before it could even form. Eli was a silent star. She stood by her father's side, beautiful and mysterious, occasionally slipping on her headphones when the applause grew too loud, but otherwise calm. She was navigating the storm. They were an hour in, and the boat Clara had built was holding steady. And then Clara saw him, Brad Mitchell, the VP of marketing from Julian's company, Blackwood Technologies. Clara had met him briefly during a tense video conference about the foundation's marketing. He was slick, condescending, and had made it clear he thought the foundation's new focus on niche causes, like neurodiversity, was a waste of resources. He was smiling, but it was the predatory smile of a shark, and he was heading straight for them. "Julian, wonderful to see you," Brad said, his voice booming. His eyes flicked to Eli, then to Clara, a smirk playing on his lips. And this must be the famous Eliana and her companion. The word dripped with condescension. Brad, Julian said, his tone cool. This is Clara Evans, Eli's advocate and a key advisor to the foundation. And this is my daughter, Eliana. Brad crouched down, getting right in Eli's face, violating every rule of personal space Clara had taught Julian. Well, hello there, Eliana. Cat got your tongue? He said in a cloying baby talk voice. Eli shrank back, pressing against Julian's leg. Her hand tightened on her stone. She doesn't speak, Brad, Julian said, his voice hardening. Ah, right, Brad said, straightening up with a look of mock pity. A real shame. But she looks the part, I'll give you that. Good for the brand. The stoic, silent child of the great philanthropist. It's a powerful image, he winked at Julian. My team and I were thinking, we could really lean into that angle for the next campaign. The silent struggle narrative. It's very compelling. Clara felt a white-hot rage flash through her. He was talking about Eli as if she were a prop, a marketing tool. She is not a narrative, Clara said, her voice low and shaking with fury. She is a child. Brad turned to her, his smile widening. Oh, the advocate speaks. Listen, sweetheart, I'm talking business here. You handle the hand-holding. I'll handle the strategy that pays for it. Your strategy is exploitative and disgusting, Clara shot back, her voice rising. The people nearby began to turn and watch. You see a child's disability as a brand asset. That's not just bad strategy. It's morally bankrupt. Brad's face darkened. You have no idea who you're talking to. I built the public image of this foundation. I know what resonates with donors. And right now, what they see is a billionaire hiding his damaged daughter until he can trot her out for a photo op with her hired babysitter. Every word was a calculated blow, designed to humiliate, to wound. And it worked. Julian flinched, the accusation hitting a nerve of his old insecurities. Eli, sensing the tension, the anger, the rising voices, began to tremble. Her carefully constructed boat was taking on water. That's enough, Brad, Julian said, his voice a low growl. But Brad was on a roll, emboldened by the audience. Is it enough, or is the truth just uncomfortable? How much are you paying her to play this part, Julian? To be the Mary Poppins who magically fixed your broken kid so you could get back to your board meetings? Eli let out a small, terrified whimper. Her hand flew to her headphones, but she was shaking so much she couldn't get them on. The world was becoming too loud again. The buzzing was starting. That was it. Clara stepped forward, placing herself directly between Brad and the family. She was no longer a waitress or an employee. She was a shield. You're a bully, Mr. Mitchell, she said, her voice ringing with a clarity and force that cut through the ballroom's murmur. You're a coward who preys on people you perceive as weaker than you. You see a non-verbal child, and you see a target. You see a woman who used to be a waitress, and you see someone you can dismiss. She took a breath, her eyes locking with his. But let me tell you what I see. I see a man so insecure in his own value that he has to tear down a 7-year-old girl to feel powerful. I see a man so blinded by spreadsheets and market shares that he's forgotten how to see human beings. You talk about brand image? There is no worse look for a foundation dedicated to children than having a man like you as its public face. The area around them had gone completely silent. Everyone was watching. Brad's face was a mottled patchwork of fury and embarrassment. He opened his mouth to retort, but no words came out. Then Julian stepped up beside Clara, placing a firm protective hand on her shoulder. He looked at Brad, and the cold, absolute authority was back in his eyes, magnified tenfold. Brad, you are a brilliant marketer, Julian said, his voice deceptively calm. But Clara's right. You lack a fundamental component necessary for this work, a soul. Your position with the Blackwood Foundation is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. As if on cue, 2 burly men in suits materialized and moved toward Brad. His face went from rage to sheer panic. Julian, you can't be serious. Over this? Over her? He gestured wildly at Clara. I have never been more serious in my life, Julian said. You threatened my daughter, and you insulted the single most valuable person in this entire foundation. Now get out. As security took a sputtering Brad Mitchell by the arms and began to lead him away, a small, quiet sound broke the silence. It was a voice, a tiny, unused, raspy little voice. Go away, it said. Everyone froze. Julian's head snapped down. Clara's heart stopped. Eli was standing there, her headphones dangling from one hand, her other hand out of her pocket, her chin lifted. She was looking directly at Brad's retreating back. Go away, she repeated, a little louder this time, her voice filled with a 7-year-old's pure, righteous indignation. Bad man. A collective stunned gasp went through the onlookers. Julian dropped to his knees, his eyes wide with disbelief and shimmering with tears. He looked at his daughter as if seeing a miracle. Eli, he whispered, his voice cracking. You spoke. Eli turned her gaze from Brad to her father. Then she looked at Clara. A slow, brilliant, breathtaking smile spread across her face. And then she did something else. She launched herself forward and wrapped her arms around Clara's waist, burying her face in her dress. Clara instinctively wrapped her arms around the small, trembling body, holding her tight. She could feel Julian's hand on her back, his thumb rubbing small, grateful circles. The three of them stood there, a tiny, impromptu island in the middle of a glittering ballroom, a family forged in a crucible of conflict and kindness. The buzzing had stopped. The boat had not only weathered the storm, but it had sailed right through to the other side, finding a voice in a future it never knew it had.